The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, says the climate crisis will drive instability in some global regions. The Defense Department has several climate initiatives underway. John Conger is director of the Center for Climate and Security. He's former Principal Deputy Undersecretary of Defense Comptroller, and he's writing about climate and national security in Defense One. John, welcome. It's great to have you back on the program. And you write this. The piece is titled, "Is Climate Change America's Greatest Security Threat?" And you write that asking that may not be the right question. What is the right question to ask, John?
The right question is, how does climate change affect all of the threats that we are already worried about, all the traditional threats, whether it's Russia or China or instability around the world? How does climate change influence and affect those things? That's the right question, because it's not an or, it's an and that we have to be thinking about, how they interact together.
So all of the things, it strikes me that, and I'm not picking on the Pentagon, but a lot of folks are thinking about climate as another thing, and it sounds like you're arguing it's not another thing, it impacts all of the things that we're already thinking about and working toward. Am I hearing you right?
Absolutely. Yes, mission assurance has been something that the Pentagon's cared about for a long time. Indications and warning are things, and intelligence is stuff that the Pentagon's cared about for a long time. And climate change is one of the inputs to all of that. And so you think about it in terms of this. If Russia or China is the opponent on the other side of the chessboard, climate change is changing the chessboard in the middle of the game. And so wouldn't you want to know what squares are moving around or are going to disappear in the middle of the game? Well, of course you would, because that affects how you plan, how you strategize. And if you understand it and your opponent doesn't, that gives you an advantage just the same way it gives them an advantage if they understand it and you don't.
So the next extrapolation of that, then, it strikes me, is that understanding how it's also affecting whoever the adversary is, whoever it is that's on the other side of the chessboard, right?
Absolutely. So think about the Arctic for a second. The Arctic ice is melting. It's creating a whole new navigable ocean. Russia's moving forces north. They are reinforcing bases along their north coast. They are thinking about this a lot. And so if we're not thinking about it, they have an advantage, and they're certainly acting to respond to the new environment.
Does one think about climate change the same in every environment? I'm not sure that there is a one-size-fits-all here, John. So how does, if one does not, how does one go about thinking about climate and analyzing the impacts of climate in each individual circumstance?
Well, and that's what makes it so complicated, right? So if you're in the Middle East, you're going to be thinking about climate one way. If you're in the Arctic, you're going to think about it differently. Sometimes it affects the missions that you're going to have to perform. Sometimes if you're at a base on the South Atlantic coast, you're worried about increased hurricane activity, or at least stronger hurricanes, more precipitation. You have to think through the things in the lens of your current job. Because it's just got to fold right in. It's not a separate thing. It's not somebody else's job. It's part of your job.
So the hurricane example is interesting. Was speaking about hurricanes this weekend and the fact that in South Florida, no hurricanes last year because a lot of the climate shift resulted in that in those storms hitting in the Gulf. And so climate change isn't, it seems to me, an either or. It's a what if. You know, predicting where these things shift and how they shift is part of the challenge here, isn't it?
Yeah, so we have to build up our capability to make predictions about weather patterns and climate patterns, and that's certainly got to be part of it. But I think it's important to anticipate the storms that are coming and to assume rather than, well, what if my base gets hit by a hurricane at some point in time, assume that it will, and to plan for that.
You write in this piece about some of the damage that was done, particularly to Tyndall a couple of years ago, and you point out that there was more damage there than any enemy has inflicted on the United States probably ever.
You can make arguments about Pearl Harbor, but still.
Fair point. Excuse me, and that's a terrible recollection on my part. But certainly since World War II, this is significant now, isn't it? Much more so than maybe it was even 5 or 10 years ago.
Well, and so there's always been hurricanes, and people will argue that, and that's true. But there's more precipitation, there's more water in each one, they're more severe. And so we have to assume that the damage is going to occur. But the thing is, worrying about adversaries is important. Worrying about Mother Nature is also important. And when, in the course of a year, you get $5 billion, $10 billion worth of bills from hurricane impacts and infrastructure that has to be rebuilt, you can't ignore that. And you're going to have to start thinking about that resilience piece as well. How do you reduce the future bill? How do you reduce the future impact when the storms are coming?
Less than a minute left, John. What to do about that? How does one, or how should a group of people, the Pentagon, I suppose, analyze that?
Well, you have to start taking it into account. So you have to start thinking about resilience in everything you build. This is every future. It's not a resilience project. It is every piece of infrastructure you build has to be built to be resilient. You have to start worrying about the new environment you're going to live in, whether it's the heat waves out west and wildfires, or the new ocean you're going to patrol in the Arctic, or new dynamics in South Asia where, India controls all of Pakistan's fresh water. This is going to affect every piece of the puzzle. And so you have to start thinking and planning for it, or you're going to get caught by surprise.
John Conger, thanks very much as always.
It's been a pleasure.